Snow Ridge. Tactical Range sat high above the tree line where white wind carved through concrete and steel. The facility spanned a frozen ridge, its shooting lanes buried under a crust of wind-polished snow. Towering mountains walled in the range, from all sides, their blue shadows deepening with every passing hour. Steel targets were pinned in drifts as hard as ice, the farthest stretching to the base of a ridge 1,000 meters away. Every rifle on the benches gleamed, matte black carbon, engraved nameplates, silent stabilizers. The shooters matched, high performance. Bodies in cold weather uniforms stamped with elite emblems, movements practiced and precise. They belonged here. Reagan Brooks did not. She stepped from a transport sled wearing a faded green parka stitched at the elbows, canvas snow pants too old for any current regulation, and scuffed boots with a cracked toe. Her rifle case was strapped to her back with a canvas belt. Her ID badge clipped to her shoulder read Civilian Observer in faded blue print. As she approached the sign-in table, the first wave of stillness passed over the range. Not silence, just adjustment. Eyes tracking. Without welcome. One of the range marshals leaned toward another, speaking low. A third staff member tapped something on a tablet and muttered, "Audit slot mix-up." A tall female officer with sleek goggles and a perfect jawline looked Reagan up and down before speaking. "I thought the audit slot was for stakeholders, not surplus store models." Laughter rippled faintly as others nearby overheard. A young marksman glanced at Reagan's rifle case and made a show of pretending to shield his own rifle, drawing a chuckle from the two techs beside him. The social media thread began almost immediately. A post tagged Naughty Thrift Sniper was uploaded before Reagan finished signing the liability waiver. No one intervened. The jokes stayed just clean enough to be ignored by policy, but sharp enough to draw blood. Reagan said nothing. She handed over her forms, nodded to the marshal, and walked alone toward the observation tent. Inside, the contrast sharpened. Rifle racks gleamed under LED lights. Data screens showed wind shifts in real time. A private locker room door closed softly behind one of the National Reserve shooters, her thermal gloves peeking from a designer duffel bag. Reagan unlatched her own case at a side bench, away from the others. The rifle inside looked like it had lived a life no one else here would understand. Woodstock, frosted scope, no biometric trigger. One of the civilian contractors walked past and did a double take, slowing just enough to mutter, "That thing belongs in a museum." He wasn't joking. The warning signs were already there in the whispers, the stares, the casual cruelty dressed up as humor. But Reagan Brooks had faced worse than this. She just hadn't expected to find it here, in a place where precision should matter more than prejudice. Cameron Hall called her name with mock ceremony, waving her forward like he was announcing a raffle winner instead of an audit participant. He was young, lean, full of the casual swagger that came with growing up inside high-level ranges. His uniform was crisp and snug under his insulated vest, his boots unscuffed. Reagan followed him onto lane 3. Snow was packed tight under their feet, the air cutting sharp and dry against her cheeks. Cameron pointed to a white bench, dusted with frost. "All right, Ms. Brooks, let's start with the basics," he said, loud enough for several others to hear. "This is the muzzle. It's the part that sends the bullet forward. And this," he added, holding up a training rifle like he was teaching school children, "is the trigger. We squeeze, not yank. No cowboy moves." A few shooters nearby smirked. One of them snorted and muttered, "Might as well give her a Nerf gun." Reagan nodded once and sat when told, her wool-lined gloves gripping the bench lightly. She made no comment. Cameron continued his lecture, slowly, unnecessarily loud, pausing to ensure nearby shooters could catch his rehearsed explanations. He gestured at the range like a tour guide. Now for long-distance accuracy, breathing matters. You want to control your exhale, inhale, pause, squeeze, follow through. Reagan listened without interruption. She made no correction even as he placed her hands awkwardly on the training rifle's grip. He adjusted her elbow, then her cheek welled, as though she were a child learning to hold a spoon, his palm pressed down on her shoulder. "Loosen up," he said. "You're too tense. Shooters don't need to look like statues." She exhaled quietly and let him reposition her. No tension. No resistance. A woman, 2 benches over, leaned toward a fellow competitor and whispered, not quietly enough, "She looks like she should be prepping lunch trays, not pulling triggers." The man next to her grinned. "Maybe she is. Probably swapped slots with the kitchen staff." He raised his voice. "I hope she signed the waiver. Wouldn't want to be liable if she shoots her own boot." Another shooter called out from behind a scope. $50 says she can't land a round past 50 meters. "You're on. Make it 75 if she doesn't cry before zeroing in." Laughter followed. Reagan said nothing. She accepted the training rifle back, inspecting it briefly before lowering it to the bench. When she tried to speak up, to mention that she might not need quite so much basic instruction, Cameron cut her off with a patronizing smile. "Trust the process," he said. "We'll get you there." But there was no process here, just performance. Cameron was putting on a show for his colleagues, and Reagan was the unwilling star. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring her inadequacy, confirming their assumptions. The cold bit deeper as she realized this wasn't about training at all. It was about humiliation. By noon, the cold had deepened. Snow drifted sideways in sheets, stinging the exposed skin on anyone who lingered too long without shelter. Reagan remained outside adjusting her scope while others ate or watched video reviews. Her gloves, stitched with visible thread, stayed steady on the weapon. Her breath fogged the air like everyone else's, but no one warmed her seat, her name, or her presence. Inside the main tent, the social media thread was still active. A new post captioned, "Can thrift gear freeze sarcasm?" showed her alone on the ice, her back to the camera, rifle across her knees. The likes climbed quietly. Blake Forrester, one of the elite marksmen, strolled past her bench and raised an eyebrow at her setup. "Is this part of the entertainment package?" he asked, eyes flicking from Reagan to her rifle case. "Because I missed the sign-up form for this performance." Cameron chuckled nervously but said nothing. Reagan didn't move. The jokes grew bolder. Someone had started a betting pool on how many shots she'd get off before giving up. A contractor filmed her from behind, zooming in on her patched coat and cracked boots. The video was already being shared in group chats with captions like, "When Goodwill meets gun range." No one asked her name, no one offered advice. They had already decided who she was. Connor Yates, the head instructor, emerged from the control booth with his clipboard. He was older, more seasoned, but his eyes held the same dismissive glint as the others. He watched Reagan for a moment, then turned to Cameron. "How's our guest doing?" he asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "Still working on the fundamentals," Cameron replied. "Might take a while." "Well, don't spend all day on it. We've got real training to get back to." The words hit like a slap. Not just the dismissal, but the casual way he said it, as if she weren't sitting right there, as if she weren't worth the courtesy of basic acknowledgement. Reagan felt the familiar weight of isolation settling around her shoulders. It was the same feeling she'd carried through years of being the only woman in rooms full of men who thought her presence was a mistake, a quota fill, a diversity hire. She'd learned to absorb their skepticism, to let their assumptions roll off her back. But this felt different. This felt personal. A tech specialist named Sarah Martinez had been watching from the observation deck. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing. She'd noticed the way Reagan handled her equipment, the careful, practiced movements that spoke of real experience. When she overheard Connor's comment, something in her expression shifted. "That's not right," she murmured to herself, but loud, enough for the shooter next to her to hear. "What's not right?" he asked. Sarah gestured toward Reagan. "The way they're treating her." "She hasn't done anything wrong," the shooter shrugged. "She doesn't belong here. Look at her gear." But Sarah kept watching, and she began to see what the others were missing. The way Reagan's hands never hesitated on her equipment. The automatic checking of bolt tension, the practiced efficiency of every movement. This wasn't someone playing dress-up. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The breaking point came when Connor decided to make Reagan's session a teaching moment for the entire facility. "Attention, everyone," he announced over the range's PA system. "We're going to do a little demonstration on lane 3. Sometimes it's good to see what happens when fundamentals aren't properly established." Phones came out immediately. The crowd gathered, not to support, but to witness what they expected to be a spectacular failure. Someone started a live stream titled "Civilian Meltdown at Elite Range." Cameron handed Reagan her rifle, the old bolt action she'd brought. "Let's start simple," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. 50-meter target, nice and big, just try to hit the paper." The condescension was thick enough to cut. Reagan looked at the target, then at the crowd of faces surrounding her, some amused, some bored, all convinced they knew how this would end. Blake Forrester leaned against a nearby bench, phone recording. "This is going to be good," he said, to nobody in particular. Connor stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Now, civilian shooting can be very different from what we do here," he announced, clearly performing for his audience. "Different standards, different expectations. We just want to see honest effort." The words stung more than the cold, not because they were cruel, but because they were designed to humiliate. This wasn't about training or evaluation. It was about entertainment. They'd turned her into their afternoon amusement, and they weren't even trying to hide it. Reagan felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack. Like ice under pressure, still holding but ready to shatter or reshape entirely. She'd spent 8 years designing the very systems these people trained on. She'd developed the optics software that half of them relied on for long-range accuracy. She'd solved ballistics problems that their instructors couldn't even spell. And they were treating her like a tourist who'd wandered onto their range by mistake. For a moment, she considered walking away. It would be easier, quieter, more dignified than whatever humiliation they had planned. But then she looked at her rifle, the custom-built Briggs that she'd designed herself, tested in conditions that would make this Arctic range feel like a warm spring day. She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, written off. She thought about the women who would come after her, who might find themselves in similar situations. Reagan took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, like fuel. When she looked up, her eyes were steady, focused. The crowd was still there, phones still recording, but something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't going to just shoot their target. She was going to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. "Ready when you are," Connor said, his tone dripping with false encouragement. Reagan nodded once. She chambered around with smooth, practiced efficiency. The sound echoed across the range, clean, precise, final. The demonstration was about to begin. just not the one they expected. Reagan's first shot went exactly where she intended, low and left of the target, pinging harmlessly off the snowbank beyond. The laughter erupted immediately. "So much for cold zero," someone cracked. Cameron bent down beside her with exaggerated patience. "Let's fix that up," he said. "Your support side's rolling too much. Stay square, just get one on paper. That's the goal." Reagan said nothing. She let him adjust her position, then waited for him to step away. But instead of following his corrections, she made her own, subtle adjustments that had nothing to do with his instruction and everything to do with her own calculations. Her second shot struck the target's center mass. The steel rang clean and true. Cameron nodded approvingly. "That's more like it." The stream host muttered, "Lucky shot. Every range has wind ghosts." But Reagan wasn't relying on luck. Each shot was part of a larger plan, a methodical process of zeroing that she'd done thousands of times before. The third shot landed nearly on top of the second, the fourth grouped within an inch. By the fifth shot, the laughter had faded. Phones stayed up, but no one was speaking. Cameron leaned forward, no longer smiling. He studied the grouping, checked the spotting screen, then stepped back as if unsure what to say. "Beginner's luck?" someone muttered from the back, but the words fell flat. Reagan sat up slowly, ejecting the final casing. It spun once in the snow before settling, brass against white. She didn't smile, she didn't speak. She stood and brushed the snow from her sleeves, then began cleaning her rifle with the same quiet precision she'd shown all day. Sarah Martinez had been watching from the observation deck. Unlike the others, she'd noticed things, the way Reagan's breathing pattern never wavered, how her positioning was already perfect before Cameron's corrections, the practiced efficiency of her movements. "That wasn't luck," Sarah said quietly to the shooter beside her. "What?" "Look at her technique. Look at how she handles that rifle. That's not a beginner." The shooter frowned, studying Reagan more carefully. For the first time, he noticed the small details, the way she checked her bolt, the automatic way she tested her trigger, the fact that her adjustments were actually corrections of Cameron's misguided help. "Who is she?" he asked. Sarah was already pulling out her phone, but not to record. She was searching. Within minutes, she'd found something that made her eyes widen. "Holy shit," she whispered. "What?" "I know who she is." Word began to spread quietly. Through the observation area, not gossip, investigation. Someone else started searching, then another. The pieces were coming together, and the picture they formed was very different from what Connor and Cameron had assumed. Reagan finished cleaning her rifle and looked up at the crowd. Her expression was calm, patient. She wasn't done. This had just been the warm-up. The real test was coming, and she was ready for it. Connor Yates emerged from the instructor's booth, his face lined from years in cold air, his posture rigid with authority. He'd been watching from inside, and Reagan's performance had clearly unsettled him. The easy mockery was gone, replaced by something harder to define. "Let's give her a proper challenge," he said, his voice smooth, but his eyes narrowed with calculation. "The 1,000-meter target, only one on this range that actually measures skill." Blake gave a low whistle. "That's top shelf, sir. I've seen candidates wash out trying to zero that line." Another shooter laughed nervously. "She hits it once and I'll eat my dog tags." Connor looked directly at Reagan, his expression unreadable. "You up for it?" Cameron hesitated. "That's beyond the scope of her evaluation," he said quickly, glancing between them. She's not what?" Connor raised one eyebrow. "You saw the grouping." Reagan didn't blink. She simply nodded. Then she turned to her gear and knelt beside the frost-dulled case resting beneath the bench. Unlike the military-issued shells stacked nearby, hers was matte black with rounded corners and a leather strap darkened by years of use. She unlatched it quietly. The rifle inside was unlike anything else on the line. Not sleek, not tactical, not branded. The woodstock was darkened by oil and time, hand-carved at the grip. The barrel was cold-forged steel with a faint swirl pattern. Under the frost, the scope was narrow, compact, set low over the action. Everything about it was designed for function over show. Etched into the left side in small, almost hidden text were the letters Briggs 12C, hand-stamped into the steel. The atmosphere shifted. The silence had weight now, not awe, but confusion. No one laughed, no one filmed. The sound of the case opening seemed to dull the wind. "That's yours?" Cameron asked. Reagan nodded once. "You sure it can reach the 1,000? Blake asked, trying to inject levity. "That thing looks like it survived 2 wars and a garage fire." No one echoed him this time. At the edge of the range, a figure emerged from the logistics tent. Major Evelyn Grant, her uniform clean, her boots sharp, her hair pulled back with practiced efficiency. She didn't speak immediately. She simply stood with her hands in her jacket and watched. But when she saw the rifle, her expression changed completely. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, too quiet for most to hear. "That's a Briggs." Sarah Martinez, still researching on her phone, looked up sharply. "A what?" "Briggs 12C, custom Arctic rifle. There's only been 3 made." Grant's voice was getting louder, carrying across the suddenly quiet range. "And only one person I know who could build one." Connor turned toward her, frowning. "Major?" But Grant was staring at Reagan with a mixture of recognition and something that looked almost like reverence. "Reagan Brooks," she said, and her voice carried like a shot across the range. The name hit the crowd like a physical force. Phones came out again, but this time for searching, not recording. In the space of 30 seconds, the entire dynamic shifted. Brooks! Blake was muttering, scrolling frantically. Then his face went white. "Oh, no! Oh, crap, no!" "What?" someone demanded. "She's not a civilian observer," Blake said, his voice cracking. "She's Reagan Brooks. She designed the entire optic system we train on. The 1,000-meter target was a pale disk, nearly swallowed by glare and distance, just above the shadow line. It didn't look real from this far, just a whisper of steel balanced against white. Reagan lay prone, her body flattened against the snow, every movement deliberate. The wind cut hard from the right, rolling across the ridgeline with a low, constant moan. She didn't flinch. Her breath came slow and even, each exhale rising in the cold like a signal. She adjusted her left hand under the stock, nudged the bipod 1/2 inch, and let the final grains of snow settle around the barrel. Connor stood beside the spotting scope, one hand braced on the tripod, the other tucked into his vest. Cameron said nothing now, just watched, the color fading from his earlier swagger. A few shooters had stepped out of the shelter to watch in silence. Phones hovered uncertainly in the air, their owners unsure if they were recording a joke or a lesson. Reagan chambered the first round. The click was soft, almost inaudible. She paused, eyes fixed on the wind flag twitching near the far edge of the berm. Another breath. Then her finger slid onto the trigger. The shot cracked. No dramatics, just the clean, sharp break of a weapon fired in total control. The spotting scope jolted slightly under Connor's hand. His eyes narrowed. "Impact," he said, his voice low. "Dead center." A few murmurs stirred behind him. Major Grant stepped closer to the edge of the line, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Reagan didn't shift. She worked the bolt, drew another round into the chamber, and settled again. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the wind. Her cheeks, red from cold, showed no tension, just timing, just control. The second shot fired. It struck less than an inch from the first. Connor exhaled through his nose. He adjusted the dial on the scope, zoomed tighter. "Half an inch, maybe," he said. He didn't look away. Behind him, Blake cleared his throat and said, too loudly, "She probably dialed it in earlier, got lucky." No one responded. Reagan's third round was already in the chamber. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. The snow shifted slightly beneath her hips as she dug in, anchoring against recoil. Another pause, another exhale. The third shot rang out. This one landed directly on top of the first. The range went silent. Connor stepped back from the scope like he'd just touched something hot. A younger marksman leaned forward to check the screen, then stepped away again, blinking. Cameron just stared, his lips slightly parted. From the back of the line, Major Grant's voice broke the silence. "She built that platform," Grant said. Heads turned toward her. "That rifle's a Briggs 12C, cold-forged, custom-channel optic. I've only seen 3 in service, and only one woman I've ever met knew how to tune wind compensation at that range without equipment." Reagan began disassembling her rifle, not looking up. Her hands moved smoothly. She released the bolt, laid it gently across the case's lining, and began wiping down the receiver. Grant continued, her voice carrying effortlessly in the stillness. "Reagan Brooks, contracted through Dominion Research 8 years ago, lead engineer for the Polar Optics, platform your entire program trains on. You've all run a software every time you zero past 800 in a crosswind." Someone muttered, "No way." Grant turned toward the doubter. "She wrote the wind drift tables you misquote, built the system you thought was military issue. That scope, she designed it. You're standing on a range built off her math." The silence this time was different. Not just absence of sound, collapse of belief. Phones lowered quietly. Others were turned off entirely. The woman they'd mocked, dismissed, and humiliated had just demonstrated mastery of a skill most of them would never achieve, and she'd done it with equipment she'd designed herself. The wind softened as the sun began its slow descent behind the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow-packed lanes. The shooting gallery stood mostly still now, its sharp voices replaced by muted footsteps and the quiet rustle of gear being packed away. A few shooters lingered in small, uncertain clusters, their eyes drifting toward Lane 3, where Reagan Brooks had stood only minutes ago. No one laughed, no one spoke above a murmur. The earlier current of arrogance had drained from the range like air from a punctured suit. Connor Yates moved slowly across the ice, his clipboard forgotten under one arm. He approached Reagan near the edge of the prep shelter, where she was, stowing her rifle with the same calm care she'd used all day. "We don't see shooting like that out here," he said. "Hell, I don't think we've ever seen shooting like that anywhere." She didn't offer anything in return. He shifted his weight, eyes down. "I mean it," he added, his voice lower. "You were treated poorly. If you'd ever want to return in an official capacity, coaching, consulting, we'd make space for that." He wasn't offering redemption, just recognition. A beat too late, Reagan nodded once, polite but unmoved. "Thank you for the access," she said. "Your team's sharp. They'll grow once they stop staring at the wrong targets." Blake Forrester, stood a short distance away, pretending to tighten the strap on his rucksack. His face was still and drained. Someone had handed him a protein bar. It remained unopened in his hand. Cameron lingered at the tent's side flap, watching Reagan with a tight jaw and a set of silent questions he didn't know how to ask. None of them approached. She didn't need them to, Major. Evelyn Grant stepped forward from the logistics trailer, her boots crunching across the surface. In her hand was a sealed folder bearing the Dominion Research crest and a clipped packet of internal forms. "We'd like to formalize your position," she said, without ceremony. "Your credentials have already been confirmed. Lead developer, target, acquisition, ballistic mapping across 4 polar ranges. The oversight was internal. It won't happen again." Reagan looked up from her case and met her eyes. "I'm not looking for correction," she said. "Only for clarity." Grant inclined her head. "You got it." She offered the folder, but Reagan didn't take it. "Send it through," she said evenly. "I'll review it at home. No handshake, no dramatics, just 2 women standing in a field of wind-scoured snow, history spoken plainly between them." The last of the crowd began to disperse as Reagan fastened her coat and pulled the strap of her rifle case over one shoulder. Behind her, the benches were empty. The metal targets were covered again in frost. A few junior shooters stood still, their eyes lowered. One of them had posted the stream earlier. Now he was scrolling through his phone, deleting without prompting. He glanced up only once, then tucked the phone away and turned toward the truck. Reagan stepped out onto the trail that wound along the outer fence. The path was quiet except for the muffled crunch beneath her boots. Her prints formed a single, unbroken trail, each step pressed deep and clear into untouched snow. No one followed. No one dared. She arrived quiet, overlooked, and dressed in thrifted gear, in a place built for performance and prestige. What they saw was a civilian with a worn rifle and wool gloves. What they missed, until it was too late, was a woman whose precision had shaped the very standards they trained under. Reagan Brooks never raised her voice, never demanded recognition. She let the truth speak through her hands, her breathing, her shots. And when the silence finally fell, it wasn't shame she left behind. It was clarity. You don't need applause to know your worth. You don't need status to carry strength. Sometimes, the most powerful statement is the one you make without saying a word. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply being exactly who you are when everyone expects you to be less. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.